Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into the source material you sent us, tackling a really significant topic, business ethics.
Right. And at its heart, it's really about, applying moral thinking values, judgments directly to the business world.
From the big strategies all the way down to, everyday choices.
Exactly. And we've got a great mix of sources here, articles, reports, academic stuff. Our aim is to kind of boil it all down.
Pull out the key insights, maybe the surprising bits, the things that make you go, aha, so you can get up to speed on this pretty complex area quickly.
Yeah, it's quite a path the sources lay out. We'll touch on the history where these ideas even come from.
And the big questions businesses face, those core principles, but also see them play out in, real situations, real cases.
And we won't shy away from the criticisms either. It's important to see the full picture. Okay, let's get into it.
So the sources jump right in, defining business ethics not just as a term, but looking at the why. Why do we need this moral compass in business?
Mm-hmm. And straight away, a few core ideas keep coming up. Things like corporate social responsibility, CSR.
Right, the idea that businesses owe something more than just profit to society.
Absolutely. And linked to that is stakeholder theory. This one really pushes back against older ideas.
How so?
Well, it argues that businesses need to consider everyone impacted by what they do, not just the people who own shares.
So employees, customers, the local community, even the environment.
Exactly. Balancing all those interests.
Okay. And then there's ethical leadership. That seems pretty crucial.
Definitely. How leaders act, the example they set, the kind of culture they build, it all shapes whether ethics is taken seriously or not.
And sustainability seems woven into everything these days.
It really is. Thinking about the long haul, environmental impact, social impact, not just the next quarter's results.
Makes sense. And finally, fairness and justice. Basic stuff, really treating people equitably.
Right. Ensuring things are distributed fairly, both the good and the bad. And these concepts aren't just definitions in the sources. They're presented as the places where the really tough questions pop up.
Like, what's a business actually for? Is it purely about profit? Or are there wider responsibilities baked in from the start?
That's a huge one, still debated constantly. And it leads to, what's the proper relationship between a business and the society it operates in? Are they separate? Or is business obligated to contribute?
Big picture stuff. But then it gets practical, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you actually decide what's right or wrong in a specific business situation?
Yeah, and are those standards the same everywhere? Or does culture change the rules?
Tricky. And what about us as individuals? How do our personal ethics fit or clash with what the business asks of us?
That's a constant tension for many people. And the sources really emphasize how today's world makes these questions even harder.
Like globalization.
Exactly. Suddenly you're dealing with ethical issues across totally different legal systems, different cultural norms. Think about supply chains, fair wages, working conditions.
Thousands of miles away. Yeah. And technology too.
Oh, absolutely. Data privacy is a massive ethical minefield. AI and bias in decision making. What happens to jobs with more automation? These are huge ethical challenges right now.
Okay, so these modern issues, these concepts, they didn't just appear recently. The sources show they've got history, philosophical roots.
Right. Understanding that helps see why we have these different viewpoints today.
It goes back surprisingly far. Like Adam Smith, everyone knows the invisible hand, right?
Yeah.
But the sources mentioned he also wrote about moral sentiments.
Yeah, it wasn't just pure self-interest. He apparently saw empathy and ethical understanding as necessary for markets to work properly, kind of like guardrails.
Interesting. And then Immanuel Kant, the philosopher.
Mm-hmm. His idea of the categorical imperative gets brought up. Basically, act only in ways you'd be okay with becoming a universal law. If everyone did this, would it be okay?
So in business, if you're thinking of cutting corners, ask, what if every company did this?
Exactly. If the answer's bad, it's likely unethical. It's a way to think about universal duties.
Okay. Then fast forward a bit. John Rawls, justice as fairness.
Right. His ideas provide a framework for looking at fairness within a company. Are hiring practices fair? Is pay equitable? Do people have equal opportunities?
Things like that. And we have to mention Milton Friedman.
Can't avoid him. His view, famously, was that the only social responsibility of business is to make profits for shareholders, as long as it stays within the law.
Which is a view that things like stakeholder theory directly challenges them.
Absolutely. The sources position Friedman as a sort of baseline that much modern business ethics reacts against, while still acknowledging, businesses do need to be profitable to survive.
And the sources definitely highlight a shift in the 21st century towards things like stakeholder theory and sustainability, moving beyond just the shareholder.
Yeah, very clearly. Yeah. And they mentioned specific thinkers driving this. R. Edward Freeman is central to stakeholder theory.
What's his main point, according to the sources?
That good strategy today means managing for all stakeholders. It's not just an ethical add-on, it's fundamental to success. It involves balancing needs, talking to different groups.
A real mindset shift. And Norman Bowie.
His work, also mentioned, helps apply classic ethical frameworks like utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number.
Or deontology, focusing on duties.
Right, and virtue ethics, focusing on character, applying those to business decisions and leadership. He really stresses that ethics needs proper leadership and real commitment.
Okay, so we have the history, the concepts, but the sources really make this concrete with case studies. This is where it gets really powerful, I think.
Definitely. Seeing how these principles play out or fail to play out in the real world.
Let's start with CSR, corporate social responsibility. Remind us.
It's about businesses doing good, contributing positively, going beyond just what the law requires, environment, labor, community stuff.
And a really stark case the sources use to show why CSR is needed, especially globally, is Rana Plaza.
Oh, yes. The 2013 disaster in Bangladesh. A garment factory building collapsed. Over 1,100 people died. Just horrific.
And these factories were making clothes for big Western brands.
Exactly. And the sources stress this wasn't just a random accident. The conditions were known to be terrible. Dangerous building, long hours, low pay.
So the ethical question landed right on the brands.
Yeah.
What's your responsibility for factories you don't own but rely on?
Huge pressure followed. It led to actual agreements on safety, compensation funds. The big takeaway highlighted is your ethical responsibility goes down your supply chain.
You can't just ignore it because it's far away.
Yeah.
Transparency, collaboration.
Yeah.
Needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, moving to stakeholder theory, balancing everyone's interests, not just profits.
The Volkswagen emission scandal comes up here, right? 2015.
A textbook example, sadly. VW deliberately installed software defeat devices to cheat on emissions tests. Cars were polluting way over the legal limit in actual driving.
And the impact hit pretty much every stakeholder group imaginable.
Totally. Shareholders lost billions as the stock price crashed. Customers had cars that weren't compliant, lost value. Employees faced layoffs, massive reputational damage.
Communities got more pollution. Governments had to take action, impose fines.
It's a powerful illustration of what happens when you ignore stakeholders. It wasn't just illegal, it was a deep ethical breach with huge long-term costs, financial, legal, reputation, all of it.
The lesson being
that genuinely considering all stakeholders isn't optional for long-term health. And transparency is vital for trust once that trust is gone.
Hard to get back. Okay, ethical leadership. Leaders setting the tone.
Here the sources point to Howard Schultz at Starbucks as a positive example, someone who tried to build values into the company.
Like how so? What did he do?
Well, the material mentions things like offering healthcare and stock options, even to part-time workers, way before that was common, advocating for fair labor.
And linking Starbucks success to social initiatives, ethical coffee sourcing, community projects.
Exactly. He's presented as someone who prioritized values, even if it costs more initially, shaping the culture from the top.
Right. Sustainability next, meeting today's needs without messing up the future.
And for this, the sources spotlight Interface, the flooring company.
What makes them stand out?
Their commitment, especially under their founder, Ray Anderson, they set these incredibly bold goals, like becoming carbon neutral, which they achieved, using tons of recycled materials.
I think I read they used biomimicry, learning from nature for design.
Yes. The point is, they didn't just talk the talk. They embedded sustainability into how they operated, how they innovated, showed it could work financially too.
Okay, last principle. Fairness and justice, treating people equitably.
And a tough case here is the Equifax data breach from 2017.
Oof, I remember that. Massive breach. Millions affected.
Yes, highly sensitive data, social security numbers, addresses. The sources focus on the fairness aspect for consumers. They faced huge risks, identity theft, fraud through no fault of their own.
And Equifax got a lot of criticism for how they handled it, didn't they? Slow response, not enough protection.
Right. It raised big questions about corporate responsibility for data security. There were lawsuits, huge fines, new regulations followed.
The takeaway seems pretty clear. Protect customer data. Be transparent if things go wrong. Be accountable.
It's a matter of basic fairness and justice in the digital age.
So these principles, these cases, they offer a lot, but the sources are good at pointing out this field isn't perfect. There are challenges, critiques.
Definitely. On the theoretical side, there's subjectivity. What's considered ethical can vary a lot between cultures, makes universal rules tricky.
And that constant tension, profit versus other responsibilities. How do you actually strike that balance day to day?
It's tough. Plus, business is just so complex now. Global supply chains, AI, etc. Old ethical frameworks don't always fit easily.
And practically speaking,
Well, how do you measure ethical performance accurately? It's not like tracking profits. How do you quantify fairness?
good point. And the trade-offs. Investing in green tech might hurt short-term profits. Leaders have to make those calls.
And just implementing ethical policies across a huge company, especially when focused on quarterly results, it's a massive challenge.
Beyond the difficulties, there are outright criticisms too, right?
Yes. Some argue business ethics focuses too much on individual companies and misses the big picture systemic issues like inequality or climate change, where business plays a huge role.
And the greenwashing charge. Companies using ethics as PR.
Exactly. The worry that it's just for show, hiding unethical practices underneath, hypocrisy.
And just plain skepticism. Does any of this actually change how companies behave when push comes to shove and profit is on the line?
That's a common critique. Is the profit motive just too strong?
So, after covering all this ground, the history, the big questions, the core principles illustrated by cases like Rana, Plaza, or VW, and then the very real limitations and critiques,
Yeah.
where does that leave us?
Well, it shows business ethics isn't simple or settled. It's messy, it's evolving, but the sources make a strong case that it's more important than ever. Businesses face immense scrutiny, complex challenges.
Yeah, you can't really ignore this stuff anymore, can you? Understanding these ideas, the tensions, it's pretty vital for anyone in or observing the business world today.
Absolutely. Even with the difficulties.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the source material you shared on business ethics. Thanks for sending it our way.
It definitely leaves you thinking. And maybe with this final question for you, the listener, given that tension we talked about, profit versus responsibility and how hard it is to really implement ethics everywhere, especially globally, how can individuals, as consumers, employees, citizens, effectively push for these principles and actually hold businesses accountable?
Something to chew on. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.